schemas, psychology, CBT. Under the umbrella of CBT, there are quite a few other things under there, such as schemas, DBT, and all sorts. I'm going to talk about schemas, and I'm going to begin a whole thing about schemas, but they can be quite complicated to understand. But once you get the gist of what they are, you'll understand that it's not really that hard to understand. So a schema is a pattern of thought or behaviour that organises information, kind of interprets what's happening, and it organises the thoughts and the patterns into a particular type of understanding for the person to place a meaning on it as to what it means to them, basically. All right. So we have a schema mode, which is like the thought pattern, the cognition, the way the information is organised, and then we have the schema trait, which is the behaviour, which is the response to something in a particular way. So how can I give you an example of that? So abandoned child schema, this is the thought process, because the person feels a bit like nobody wants them, parents were a bit distant, for whatever reasons. Everyone's schema is slightly different, but it will fall into one of the 18 categories, but the story will be different. They may have a schema trait, which means they might do something in particular whenever they feel like their schema mode has been activated, basically. Schemas organise and categorise information and the relationships in relation to them. Okay, so whatever somebody picks up and however they interpret it is all about how it is perceived to them. And schemas are difficult to break. In fact, they're really difficult to break. And they're always linked to our childhood. Just because they're difficult to break doesn't mean you can't deal with them. What schemas do is help us understand and identify what we're actually doing to ourselves once we get a handle on what we're doing. Yeah? So once you figure out what your schema is, and you have loads of different ones, you will normally have more than one. And then when you understand what your schema trait is, you understand what you're doing, you'll be able to go into your healthy adult, not your vulnerable child or your angry child, because there's quite a few, and I'm going to go through all of these in other videos. You'll be able to identify what you're doing and manage yourself and your emotions. Okay? 18 maladaptive schemas, early maladaptive schemas, information we pick up when we're young. I'll just go through just the first one, so to give you an example. So, abandoned child. Okay, this is an early maladaptive schema where the interpretation, the perception is that caregivers, people who are meant to look after you, are not going to be available. They're going to leave you and you're going to be left, and you don't know, when you gather that information based on how you have been through your childhood, whatever the interpretation has been as if you've been left. So I'll give you an example. Have you ever been on your route home and you've seen parents picking up their children? You might see the mums picking up their children, and they pick up the children from school, and as they're walking home, some of them, not all, be on their mobile phone chatting away, just chatting away, and the child is left wandering left to their own devices. And often you see the child looking up at their mum like, "Mummy," and mummy's just ignoring them and saying, "Just walk up, shh." They tell them to stop, and the mum's just on the phone. Now, I'm not saying this has definitely happened, but that is a particular way that you can pick up a schema. So that child is open to picking up the schema of vulnerable child, feeling abandoned because they're not necessarily good enough because mum's busy right now, and mum hasn't got any time. And they may pick up the understanding, their interpretation will be, well, people don't have time for me. No one's going to listen to me. That's because I'm not good enough. And this is how a schema kind of works, right? And that's just an example. I'm not saying that is what happens when every child is picked up by their parent and their parent is on the phone. It's just an example. And for some, you can actually see where the child is actually quite needy and they're in need of their parents' attention and their mum is just not giving it to them. And this is how schemas are created. And these are early maladaptive schemas. And once they're created, they're very difficult to break. In fact, you just don't break them. You manage yourself with the schema, and you reduce the schema traits, the behaviour, the response, because of your interpretation becomes adult, healthy adult. Because all the schemas are based on childhood. So I'm going to continue to explain schemas, and I'm going to give them a bit more detail, and they'll be in the next videos. So if you want any more information on them, you can email me, or you can just search it on the web. There's quite a lot of information. It is a vast amount, so at first it can seem mind-boggling, but once it's explained, it's really easy to understand, and it's a way of understanding yourself. Information is key. It's power. And once you have the information as to why you do what you do and how you do what you do, you are empowered to make the change, which means you can do it once you know how to. Thank you for watching. My name is Desiree Shaw, and if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel, share, comment.